Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have this program, Tips for Staying Active During the Winter. I am Gail Nixick with Elderwerks Educational Services. Just as the name says, we do provide a lot of education. We're a 501(c)(3) non-for-profit located in Palatine, providing assistance for older adults for care options, whether they're remain safely in their home or transition to a community. We also publish a very comprehensive educational directory with all services throughout the state of Illinois. And just as this morning as well, we provide education for older adults and professionals throughout the year. Just a little bit about, what I'd like to mention before I introduce our speaker this morning is we have a Stepping Out to Fitness program that starts January 5th of next year. It's next month, and it's a 30-day fitness. So there's a lot of excitement throughout for this 30 days for the Stepping Out to Fitness. I will share the flyer with you during the program this morning as well. But please feel free to register with our office at 847-462-0885. And you can win some prizes and you get a goodie bag and t-shirts. So it's exciting. We've had a lot of participants and a lot of wonderful feedback regarding our Stepping Out to Fitness. We are recording this program this morning, so you can share with friends, people who aren't able to join us. And we all also are putting it on Facebook, so we are streaming it. So I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning. We're very, very happy to have Dr. Margaret Danilovich. She's the Senior Director of the Leonard Schoenfeld Research Institute at CJE and an adjunct assistant professor at Northwestern, where she directs the dual degree program in public health and physical therapy. She earned a doctorate in physical therapy from Northwestern, a PhD in public health with a focus on gerontology from the UIC, and is board certified in geriatric physical therapy. Margaret's research focuses on exercise interventions for older adults with frailty and has been funded by a variety of private foundations at the NIH. She is currently the recipient of 2 fall prevention grants from the Administration for Community Living. She serves on the study section review panel for both the NIH and the Veterans Administration, has written over 20 peer-reviewed publications, has authored columns on topics in aging for Crane Chicago Business, the Huffington Post, and the CNN, and frequently lectures and consults nationally on best practices in the care of older adults, especially related to the areas of frailty, fall prevention, and exercise programming. Welcome, Margaret. And please, if you'd be so kind as to put your questions in the chat box. We'll do our very best to answer them throughout the presentation. If not, we'll certainly address those at the end. So welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Gail, and welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm so excited to be here to share some information with everyone about how can we really stay active during these winter months, and some kind of concrete strategies to really keep engaged and keep moving. So as Gail mentioned, feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. I'll try to address them if it works in the moment. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of time at the end. I'll answer any questions. You've got my email address there. You can always reach out. I will say before we begin, this talk is going to be maybe a little depressing at the beginning, and I don't work for the state of Florida's tourism department, but it's going to make it sound like I do, because we're going to talk about why living in Chicago or these cold weather climates is really hard on our health. But I promise we have a happy ending, and we're going to talk about, despite bad weather and not a lot of sunlight, how we can actually engage in activities and strategies to improve our health. I got a message in the chat to make the video box larger on the screen. I'm not sure what I can do on my end, but Gail or Emily, I don't know if there's a way to spotlight me or something, but I'll let you figure that out. I'm not tech savvy enough here, unfortunately, to help with that. But we'll jump into looking at how we can really stay active during the winter months and keep moving to improve our health. So as the song goes, the weather outside is frightful. And luckily, at least here in Chicago, it's not been so terrible yet, despite being, December. But we look at people in, Buffalo, New York, who got something like 70 inches of snow, right? And it's that time of year. Feel free to chat in the box here. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? A little pop quiz here. If we were in person, we'd have prizes. Any guesses what this is?
Was this in the blizzard of 67 or 79?
Oh, you're close.
Lakeshore Drive.
It's a blizzard. It's Lakeshore Drive. It's 2011. And this is the Snowmageddon, when it, had that just awful snow and traffic went to a standstill on Lakeshore Drive and everyone was trapped in their cars. So hopefully we don't have something like this year, but you never know. And so this is what we have to sort of contend with in these winter months. We look at average temperature ranges here in Chicago, and my apologies to, I know we've got some people from New York and outside the area who are joining us, but at least here in the Chicago area, we see an enormous variability in temperature throughout the year. And while we're focused today on the winter, we could actually kind of make the same arguments for July and August, when it's 85, 90 degrees and humid. Who wants to go outside and walk when it's that hot? And so we have a lot of environmental sort of constraints to our physical activity. And so what ends up happening is, a lot of people say, oh, the weather outside is frightful. Forget it. I'm staying home. And what our tendency is to sort of do is to actually restrict our activities and change our behaviors in response to those environmental factors. And so oftentimes it might look like this. We're bundled up on the couch trying to stay warm, and we're just laying low, almost like we're hibernating during these winter months. What's coming up on December 21st? Anyone know what happens on the winter solstice?
Days start getting longer.
Yes, right. It's the longest night of the year. So the 21st coming up is when we have the shortest amount of daylight. So the good news is we're in the home stretch, right? Like it'll get better. But the 21st is that day when we really don't have a lot of sunlight. So we have all of these factors sort of working against us. And the implication is that our activity levels actually vary over the course of the 12-month calendar year. And so this is some research that's been published that looks at these variations in our sleeping, our sedentary behavior, which is how much of the day we are sitting or lying down, and our physical activity levels. So how much physical activity we're getting, anything that is using our muscles. In this particular study, they looked at a population of people that were 18 to 65 years of age. And what they showed was that there is this seasonal variation in our activity patterns, such that we actually sleep most in the fall, about 12 minutes more. And some of that can be explained by what happens in the fall with daylight savings time. We set our clocks back, people tend to sleep more. We are most sedentary in the winter, about almost 20 minutes more per day that we are just sitting doing nothing in the winter compared to other time points of the year. Our highest activity levels maybe unsurprisingly, are in the summer. We're active about 20 minutes more during those summer months, and we get the most amount of exercise in the summer. So this is really showing that there are these changes that affect our sleep and our activity that we might not even be conscious of doing. I personally don't say, oh, you know, it's summer, I'm going to go and be more active and get more exercise in that very explicit way. It's sort of an implicit, oh, it's nice out, I'm going to go for a walk. And so the environment can really nudge us one direction to be more active or not. So that was in a population of younger individuals. This research looked at how sort of seasonal changes impact activity and sleep among people that are 50 to 80. So I want to walk us through these graphs. So graph A right here on the upper left is our daily step count. That's how many steps we take walking per day. And this blue line here is a little hard to see, but essentially that's showing the trend over the 12-month calendar period. So we've got January on the left to, or January starts really here, and then it's December finishing up there. So what we see is, in general, our daily stepping, the number of steps we take per day, declines as we move into December, January, and those winter months. And here in July, in the summer months, we've got a larger amount of physical activity. Why does this matter? There is very strong research that the more steps you take per day, the better your health. We might have heard of that recommendation, get 10,000 steps per day. That kind of is a little bit of an arbitrary number. But in essence, the more you walk, the better your health outcomes. So if we're seeing this decline in those winter months, we're not going to have as good of health outcomes because we're not engaged. Now let's look at graph B, which is in the upper right here. This is the total amount of time that people are spending in bed. So here we see July, and we start going down to the fall, and then we get up to here, November, December, January, and that number is going up. We're spending more time in bed. Why does this matter? Well, for one thing, it's not good to be, inactive. The second thing is, as we have so much fluctuation in our sleep, that's also not very healthy because we have too much volatility and inconsistency. And the third part is there's a profound effect on our mood, right? If we're just laying in bed, we don't have the kind of energy to get up. Is there an underlying depression or mood disorder that's maybe driving that? And so here we see this trend for increased time that we're just kind of maybe awake, but saying, I just don't want to get up. When we look at C, which is the bottom left, this is the total amount of time that people are sleeping. And this graph is relatively pretty flat. So when we put the total time we're sleeping together with the total duration in bed, what it actually says is that over the course of the year, in this study of 50 to 80-year-olds, we're sleeping the same amount. But in those winter months, we're actually laying in bed way more because maybe there is this mood problem. Maybe we just don't feel like getting up. Like the effect of that winter month is having a change on our behavior. And then let's look at D, which is the bottom right. This is sleep latency, which is the time it takes you to fall asleep. So when we look at this graph, here we start in the summer months, and it's showing that it takes people on average about 10 minutes to fall asleep. So that's fairly normal, right? You get into bed, you kind of get comfortable, and within 10 minutes, you're going to sleep. And that stays pretty flat. And then something happens around November. And this red line is actually daylight savings time. And so we see a huge jump that these black spikes of how long it takes to get to bed or fall asleep go way up, especially after this red period. So it's telling us two things. One, daylight savings has a tremendous impact on our health in a bad way. So when we start shifting our clocks, it really messes with our sleep. And when we mess with our sleep, we mess with our health. I have yet to meet someone who has had a terrible night of sleep and says, oh, I feel great today, right? If you don't sleep well, you just don't feel well. So then we look at this graph, and as we move into October, November, December, January, that time it takes to sleep or fall asleep jumps up to about, on average, 30 minutes. So we've gone from 10 minutes to fall asleep in the summer to 30 minutes in the winter, where we're tossing and turning and we're restless and we're not getting that deep restorative sleep that we need. So again, this is more research just showing the impact of how there's these seasonal variations, and especially the impact of daylight savings time has a profound effect on our sleep and our behavior. All right, how did these pictures make you feel? No wrong answers here. Feel free to throw some words in the chat. What do you feel when you see these pictures? Anyone
Sunshine
feeling?
makes you feel great. And we haven't had sun. We haven't had sun. It's like a foreign
alive.
object.
It's great. This is wonderful. Energized. Yes, this is what light and that sort of sunshine does. We're feeling happy. Yes, all these great adjectives in the chat. Now let's compare it to these pictures. How does this make you feel? Yeah, it's kind of dreary, very gray, slow moving, sleeping. Yes, cozy. We just want to kind of bundle up. And so there's, I think, a very explicit contrast we can look at when we have these kind of days compared to something like this. And so what I want you to take away from this is light and sunlight is really critical for our health. And so why this matters here is that we see light and we're exposed to sunlight, and there are actually cells in our eyes that pick up that sunlight, and they're called these iPRGC cells. They are neurons that connect our eyes to our brain. And they are very photosensitive, meaning they're very, very sensitive to the amount of light we're getting in. So as we get light in, those cells are triggered and send messages to our brain that have two key impacts. One is on sleep, and one is on our sort of kind of sleep regulation, our circadian rhythm. Now, we know that both sleep and our circadian rhythm impact our mood. And so as we're exposed to light, we are actually affecting our mood through sleep and our circadian rhythm. Our mood actually really is important for so many ways in our mental health. But one of the key relationships is that between our mood and our hippocampus. And our hippocampus is a key area in our brain that we use for memory formation. And so one of the thoughts here is that because of this sort of indirect and direct pathway, as we are exposed to light or as we're exposed to less light, that is going to have an enormous impact on our sleep, our circadian rhythm. That's going to depress our mood, and that potentially can have this impact on our brain and our brain function and our memory. And so light is really, really, really important for our health. And just as you go away from this talk, think about this contrast between these pictures, how this feels. It energizes you. Your mood should be elevated just kind of by seeing that sunlight compared to this. And so the science behind it is really in this pathway. Now, we know that mood-related changes actually happen in response to these light alterations. And one form of this would be in seasonal affective disorder. So seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, is this form of depression where the onset of the symptoms actually sort of corresponds to the decreasing light that we see in the fall and winter months. Overall, there's a much greater prevalence of SAD among people who live at higher latitudes. So Chicago is right kind of on the border of like the medium to high latitude. So from us up north to, all of our Canadian friends, we're more at risk for this because we have more of these seasonal changes in the day length compared to other people in lower latitudes, so people in the south. And the two kind of proposed hypotheses for why this happens is that we have altered melatonin kind of rhythms. And so melatonin is naturally released in our body at night. And so as we think about in the summer, it gets to be 8 or 9 o'clock at night, it gets darker, melatonin starts getting released. It gets dark at like 4 o'clock right now. And if I look out my window, it's kind of dark now. And so that absence of light actually kind of triggers that melatonin release earlier in the day, and it messes with our bodies hormonally, causing troubles with sleeping and mood. The circadian phase shift is impacted by two things. One, primarily our daylight savings time. When we're messing with the clocks, it messes up our sort of internal body rhythm. Our bodies and our brains are very smart, and they have adapted to say, okay, it's light out, I'm going to get up. The sun is setting, I'm going to start getting ready for bed. And so when sunlight or sunrise occurs later in the day, it actually messes with our circadian rhythm because we're used to getting up at, let's say, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock because that's when sunrise is happening. But when that shifts, there's this disconnect, and that disconnect actually really messes with our health. And so the populations that are in like warmer latitudes or more southern latitudes, they do have seasonal affective disorder, but the sort of epidemiological data would say that people that are living in Florida do not have the frequency of seasonal affective disorder that someone in Canada would. And so, one of the challenges is just to think about how these all kind of might affect our health. The third thing we want to think about is this: snow. And so while this looks beautiful, there are some things we want to consider. And so this research looked at sort of the association between all of the different weather factors, temperature, precipitation, snow, and emergency department visits for falling in Canada. And what they showed were that the odds of going to the emergency department because of a fall actually increased for up to a week after it snowed more than 0.07 inches. So it's not a lot of snow. And in some ways, there's almost like a more danger period when we don't have as much snow on the ground. We might be more inclined to go out, or it might be a little bit more slippery. But the key piece here is oftentimes I think we think of, okay, it snowed, the streets get plowed, the sidewalks get shoveled, I'm good 24 hours later. And this research is actually saying up to about a week after a snowfall, you're more likely to have this fall occur. There's also a greater likelihood of falling among younger individuals. And so the researchers here speculated that perhaps younger people or more physically fit people saw that it snowed a little bit. They saw that it got shoveled and they said, oh, I'm going to go outside and go walk and go for a run. And that actually they caught themselves kind of off guard and had a fall. There was also greater likelihood of falling when the temperature was over 37 degrees. And here the speculation was, if it snows and it's freezing cold, your behavior is to say, okay, I'm just going to stay inside. But then when it gets warmer, and 37 degrees in the heart of winter is actually fairly warm, it might feel good out. And so people are more likely to go outside. And so there was this greater association of falling when it was slightly warmer. And so the kind of takeaway here is not to say don't go outside, but it's to say maybe just think about exhibiting a little bit more caution when we have a little bit of snow on the ground and when it's warmer, because our tendency is to want to go outside and walk, which we should. We just need to be a little bit more cautious. And so we're going to talk later in the presentation about how do you go outside and do it safely. So that was research from Canada. Let's look at the results from the US. And when we look at some of the data from US, we see that winter is associated with more falls in people 65 plus. So when we look at the data among falls that happen year round that cause people to go to the emergency room, about a quarter, a little over a quarter, 26% are happening in the winter, just under a quarter are happening in the fall, spring, and summer. So sometimes I look at this data and I think, well, it's only like 2% difference. That doesn't seem like much, but this is looking at all data from every hospital in the US for every person 65 years of age and older. So we're talking about multi-millions of people. And so when there's a 2% difference, it's actually hundreds of thousands, if not millions more falls that actually do occur in the winter. So there's some seasonal variation here. In the US, there's more falls that are sustained outdoors in the winter than other months. So this is actually a little bit of kind of a confusing finding, because we think that like, oh, I'm in the winter, I'm going to stay inside and not do anything. But the actual falls that do happen outside in those winter months. Men are more likely to fall than women in the winter. And of all of the falls that occurred, they found that 17% of them were directly related to weather factors. So someone reported, I slipped, I tripped because of something weather related. And 97% of those were related to ice or snow. So it really, sends that message. And what I don't want people to take away is like, oh, it's too dangerous to go outside, because that's not what we want to say. Rather, we want to say, just be aware that you might be more at risk for ice and snow, and let's talk about how you can do that in a safe way. So lots of things are working against our health in the winter. The primary ones we need to be cognizant of are colder temperature, snow precipitation, either snow or ice, and less light. And the impact is we're tending to be less physically active. So as we engage in less activity, we're going to reduce our strength, we're going to reduce our balance, we're increasing our risk for falls, our endurance goes down. As we're less active and as we get less light, our bone strength is actually going to decrease because we need vitamin D from sunlight. And when we don't get that, our actual bone mineral density can decrease in the winter. And so we have this double whammy that if my bone strength is not as strong, my balance isn't as strong, if I do fall in the winter, I'm more likely to actually break a bone. And the other component then is we also see worse mental health and depression. So this is where, I wanted to set our talk up to say, this may seem depressing, but we're not beyond hope. I want to now get to the good things and what you can do, given this research that there are these seasonal variations. We all know, I think, that exercise is one of the best things we can do for our health. Pretty much every health condition can be better managed with exercise. So I'm not going to sell you on the benefits of exercise today. What I want to kind of more sell you on or talk to you about is what specifically you should do. So in 2018, the U.S. Physical Activity Guidelines were released by the U.S. Preventative Task Force. And they said, these are the things you need to do if you are over the age of 18. You should achieve 150 minutes of aerobic exercise every week. You need to do 2 days per week of strengthening exercises. And if you are at risk for falling, add balance exercises. So given all the information we've talked about how weather can really impact our balance, and knowing that 1 out of 3 people over the age of 65 fall every year, we should just assume we are at risk for falls and add in those balance exercises. So as we think about aerobic exercise, we're thinking about anything that raises your heart rate. That can be biking, swimming, walking. It can be dancing. It can be cleaning your house. It is anything that gets your heart rate and your respiratory rate up. So what do you do here? You need to increase your heart rate to best engage in aerobic exercise, because there is profound research saying there is a dose-response relationship, meaning the greater you raise your heart rate, the more dose of intensity you are getting, and the better response and better health outcomes you're going to get. So the way I want to illustrate this is, imagine you're walking around your house. You're probably not walking with much speed, right? You're just kind of gently walking. If you were to have a conversation at that speed, you could probably do it for hours, right? Your heart rate is not elevated. Now, if you went outside and went for a walk briskly and you started to have a conversation, you should notice that your heart rate is getting up. You're taking more frequent breaths. That's the sign that you are increasing that dose of intensity to get those health benefits. So there is clear evidence that going for a leisurely, low intensity walk is better than sitting on the couch. But there's also clear evidence that doing more intensive aerobic exercise is far more beneficial than doing a light, gentle exercise. So if we put it in the context of medicine, if you have high blood pressure and your doctor says, here's your blood pressure medication, take a pill every day, and you decide to only take a quarter of the pill, you're not going to get the impact on your blood pressure. It's not going to regulate. Or if you are diabetic and you need to take a dose of insulin and you take a quarter of the dose, it's not going to regulate your blood sugar. Same thing with exercise. If we do not turn up the intensity to a level where you feel like my heart rate is getting up there, I'm breathing a little bit more heavily, you're not going to get the benefits of exercise. So the ideal intensity you want to be achieving is one where you could have a conversation with someone, but it would not be comfortable. So you should be thinking about picking up the speed while you are biking or swimming or walking or dancing or cleaning your house or whatever, to a level where you could have a conversation, but it's not like we're having, coffee and just talking. It's not that casual of conversation. So if you're a numbers person, we want to turn up that intensity to about 70 to 85% of your maximum heart rate. That is the best prescription for unlocking those health benefits in response to the right dose. This is also really important because what is good for your heart is good for your brain. And when we turn up the intensity, we're getting our heart beating faster, and every pulse that our heart is beating faster is increasing blood flow to our body, but also to our brain. And when we have more perfusion to our brain, when we have more blood flow to the brain through more intensive exercise, we're bringing oxygen and other healthy nutrients to our brain to preserve our memory. And the literature out there says, if people engage in this more intensive aerobic exercise and they meet that 150-minute kind of threshold each week, they can cut their risk for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias by 45%. So let it sink in for a minute, because there is no drug out there for Alzheimer's. There's no diet. This is the treatment, and it can cut your risk for getting Alzheimer's by 45% when we are engaging in aerobic exercise in this way. So this is really key. The second component was to lift weights twice a week. And so how you want to do this is actually to lift heavier weights. Ideally, you need to be lifting a weight that is 70 to 80% of the maximum weight you can lift in one repetition. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, shown in this picture here, and I pick up a 10-pound weight and I can only do it one time, then I should be exercising with a 7 to 8-pound weight for that exercise. Now, the hard part is you're not going to do this for every single exercise and every single movement, and most people don't have enough weights to actually do this. So our measurement of this does not need to be exact. But what you need to do is think like Goldilocks. You need to pick a weight that you can do 10 times. No more, no less. It's 10 times is the sweet spot. Because if I pick up a 1-pound weight and I'm doing this 30 times and it's no problem, I'm not actually sufficiently stimulating my muscles to get stronger. The weight is too light. Conversely, if I pick up a 15-pound weight and I can only do it 2 times, the weight is too heavy. I'm actually going to overload my muscles too much in the wrong way. So our sweet spot is find a weight that is about 10 times. So if you are currently exercising and you're doing exercises and you're like, oh, this is really easy, I can do this a whole bunch of repetitions, you need to make the weight heavier so that we're getting that optimal stimulus for our muscles. When we look at balance, how best to sort of do balance exercises, the literature would say we need to be doing this about 2 hours per week. That's about 15 to 20 minutes per day. Likewise, with aerobic and balance exercise, it needs to be challenging. So our guideline is if you don't feel slightly unsteady during balance, you're not actually stimulating your body and your brain to improve your balance. So as a physical therapist, a lot of times I see people and they're like, oh, I'm working on my balance exercises. I'm holding on to a table and I'm standing on one leg and I could do this for 2 minutes. Well, they're doing it for 2 minutes because they're so steady. It's not sufficient intensity to actually improve their balance. So you need to challenge your balance, and you can do it in a couple of very easy ways. One is don't hold on to anything. So here in the bottom right, we see a picture of someone who's balancing on one leg, and this person has their hand holding onto the chair. If you're doing this and you feel steady, get rid of your hand. That'll make you less steady. So the less contact you have is going to challenge the balance. The second way we can make our balance exercises more challenging is by taking out our vision. Closing your eyes and doing any of these balance exercises should make you feel more unsteady. And then the third way is to just sort of mess with your vision. So turn your head side to side, look up and down. It's a distracting sort of visual change that will cause a little bit more challenge for your balance. So you need to manipulate things that way and make sure that you're actually feeling slightly unsteady while you are engaging in balance training exercises so that they actually do something for you. That is the number one thing I see, is that people are like, oh, I do all these balance exercises and they're not hard enough. So frankly, it's like a waste of time because you're not actually giving your body the medicine it needs. The other piece of information that is really important is that there's literature that says you need to practice for about 50 hours before you're going to get better. And so I bring this up, especially as we move into the new year, because many people start off January 1 with a New Year's resolution, like I'm going to exercise. And most people drop that by February because we don't see the immediate benefits, perhaps. It's like if you've tried to lose weight, right? You want to lose 10 pounds in a week. You don't want to lose 10 pounds in 6 months. We want instant gratification. And so the literature on balance is really clear that it's going to take some time. It's going to take about 50 hours of practice before you actually start feeling an improvement. So the big thing is, don't give up on this. You just got to keep at it. So what can you actually do in the winter months? Well, there's lots of exercise programs at home. As Gail mentioned, they have wonderful fitness options. So sign up for those because they're great motivators. There's lots of virtual fitness options out there. There's lots of different live classes, and we at CJE have a number of different live evidence-based exercise programs that you can join in on. There's also recorded classes where you could go on YouTube or you could watch a video or things of that nature. The thing I mentioned about these two options is a live class means you have an appointment on your calendar. It tends to be more motivating and people tend to stick with it more. When you have a recorded class, you have to have the self-motivation to say, okay, I'm going to go on YouTube. I'm going to find this. And most people fail because we are people that need motivation. It's hard to get that going internally. So there are live options. There's recorded options. Look for what works for you. And I can put the CJE information in at the end if you want to check out our live classes. And I noticed Gail put the information on Stepping Out to Fitness. So sign up for all of these things to keep motivated. The other piece I want you to think about is exercise doesn't need to be this like, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do this hour-long exercise class and this big ordeal. It can be as simple as this idea of a movement snack. So rather than a big meal that you are, taking in of exercise, you can snack throughout the day. And so some of the research that we've done with colleagues at Penn State looked at this idea of movement snacking, and we prescribed a snack of doing squats and doing push-ups, either against a wall or on the floor for people for 30 seconds every day. So they just had to do 30 seconds of one, 30 seconds, and do as many repetitions as possible. And lo and behold, everybody got stronger. So when you can incorporate movement throughout the day, it's so much more beneficial for you. You can walk, you can march during TV shows. Stair climbing is a great exercise if you have access to it. And it's that same idea. It's a aerobic exercise, it's strengthening, and we want to try to safely increase that speed so we're at an intensity that's going to give you the health benefits you need. We want to lift weights and use resistance. And so whether you're using weights, bands, or your body weight, We want to shoot for that 10 repetition Goldilocks just right intensity, so you're actually getting your muscle stronger. So some things that you could think about are looking at laundry detergent or a grocery bag and fill it with books to really figure out what's the weight that I can lift about 10 times, no more, no less. And then if you have access to indoor places to go out and walk, that's always a great other option to be able to get that aerobic exercise in longer distances as possible. Now, I didn't mean to scare anyone away from our winter weather and going outside, because we actually do want to get outside. We need that light exposure. And the recommendation is to get light or that vitamin D exposure about 5 to 10 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week. And that amount appears to be what will maintain your vitamin D levels in sufficient levels for your bone strength. So even just kind of trying to get out and sit on a porch or just get outside for that 5 to 10 minutes. Now, when you do go outside, the considerations for safety are: 1, in footwear. Make sure you're wearing shoes with good support. You can also consider adding snow grips to your shoes. So a lot of runners who run outside in the winter have snow grips, and they actually look like almost like a little chain attachment that you put to the bottom of your shoe that gives you a little bit more traction. We also want to think about dressing appropriately. And so the consideration as you're going to exercise outside is to think in layers. Your layer closest to your skin should be that moisture wicking layer, because it's pulling the sweat away from your body as you're exercising. And then you're moving to like a thin insulating layer and then a coat. So oftentimes I see people who are like, oh, I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to put on my heaviest sweater and my heavy coat, and they actually overheat. And so we want to dress in layers so you can adjust. It kind of depends on your intensity and how intense you are exercising. But if you go for a walk outside, and you are, feeling like your heart rate is getting elevated, the kind of general rule of thumb is you can think that the air temperature is about 20 degrees warmer than it actually is when we are exercising. And so, that's kind of the consideration, that if it's air temperature is 20 degrees and you're going out exercising, dress like it's 40. We also want to think about hat, gloves, especially as we get older, because our bodies, as we get older, lose thermoregulation. So much like if like a newborn baby and they say always put a hat on them, we're losing heat through our head. Same kind of idea as we get older, that we need to insulate. And so even though you're bundled up, you're getting vitamin D. If you're getting it in your face, that's really where you're exposed. You need some skin exposure. You could theoretically get vitamin D through a very sunny window. If you're like right there, it's probably going to dissipate the intensity a little bit as it goes through the glass. But really, really key to get some kind of light exposure. And then, especially for people that might have asthma, COPD, they might want to consider like some sort of like scarf, facial covering, because depending on the air temperature, when we breathe in that really cold air, it's almost like a shock to our system because it causes constriction of our lung vessels. So we want to kind of just think about like, maybe depending on the temperature, depending on your specific health needs, adding in that scarf or a facial covering for sure. Now, the key here is when we're exercising or going for a walk outside, take your time. You want to walk like a penguin, okay? And so what I mean by that is, look at the picture up here. The penguins have their arms out to the side, so they're using their arms to widen their base of support. We normally walk by walking one foot to the other, one foot to the other. A penguin keeps their feet a little further apart and sort of shuffles. And so as you have that wider base of support and you're shuffling a little bit more, you're walking like a penguin, but you're increasing that stability and reducing the amount of time that you're actually standing on one leg. So as you're walking on ice, as you're walking on snow, think like a penguin, widen that base of support, make sure your arms are out. So this is where you don't want to have your hands in your coat pockets because you're narrowing your base of support. We actually want gloves on, arms out to really use that to balance. And then the final piece is we need to stay hydrated. So oftentimes I think in the summer, it's like really apparent, like, oh, I'm sweating a lot, I'm feeling thirsty. We can get just as dehydrated in the winter and we don't sort of notice it. And the other piece is that in the winter, it tends to be drier. We need that hydration and that moisture. In general, most people in the US are somewhat dehydrated. We just don't drink enough water just in general. And so especially as we are moving into the winter, we don't necessarily have the heat and the sunlight kind of nudging us to drink more. So make sure you're staying hydrated, especially if you are going outside and walking. So the key message here is really, we all need to sit less. We need to move more. We need to move more in the right intensity and really think about doing it year round to get those ultimate health benefits. So thanks so much for being here today. My email is in the slide here. I'm going to go ahead and just answer a couple of questions here. And I'm also going to just put my email in case anyone wants to reach out. So a couple of questions, recommendations on kind of mitigating effects of seasonal affective disorder. So part of it is light. Getting that light exposure is really going to be helpful. Getting out and exercising. Activity in general helps us sleep better. It helps us move and feel better. And so kind of entry-level treatments for seasonal affective disorder are centered around light and activity. If you feel like you try that and it's not working, then it's definitely time to, seek out someone, mental health counseling. We want to try to avoid, medication if needed, but if people need it, they need it. And so you can kind of think about this in tiers, but that would really be sort of the first effects or things to do for seasonal affective disorder, because as we're more active, we can help kind of fall asleep faster. Our circadian rhythm is a little bit more well adjusted. We're processing melatonin better, all of that. There was a question about daylight savings time. Oh, this is a huge area of controversy. And I feel like every year people talk about this, and should, there be a policy nationwide that we get rid of daylight savings time. There's a recommendation from one of the sleep academies, and it is, we just stay on one standard time throughout the year, and the constant switching is so hard for our health, particularly our heart health and our sleep. So who knows? We'll see what happens there. Great. So the question about, motivation and maintaining exercise. Yes, this is $1 million question, and it's probably a whole nother talk, because people in general don't stay engaged with exercise. When we look at the data, about 70% of people nationwide don't get the exercise they need. And those rates worsen as we get older and as we have more chronic health conditions, which is sad, because if we have more chronic health conditions, exercise is probably the best thing we could do for ourselves. And so it's really hard to get motivated. So I put in our website here at CJE at the Shanfield Research Institute for a number of the evidence-based programs we have. So from a motivation standpoint, finding a class where you've got an appointment on your calendar, it's scheduled in your day. That's really, really important. I can't overlook the importance of fun. If you like something, you're gonna do it. And so finding activities that you enjoy are really motivating and can help you stick with it. And then the key thing, I think, is to be as detailed as possible. And you almost want to set like a little plan for yourself and write it down and say, you know what? I am going to walk 20 minutes a day. I'm going to walk outside. I'm going to walk with this person. I'm going to do it at 10 o'clock. I'm going to wear this outfit that I set out the night before, so I don't even have to think about it, and get it into a habit. This idea of movement snacking, if you can make it more of a habit that, you know, your favorite TV show is on, and when you're watching it, you're doing your squats or your push-ups or marching in place. It also associates something you like, a TV show, with maybe something that isn't as fun, exercise, and you start to create positive associations. And as we form positive associations, we tend to stick with things a little bit better. Other questions?
No, I just wanted to comment, Margaret. I heard your portion about I think they're called the ice cleats, those grippers for the shoes. I first saw them with the mailman and noticed him walking with it. And I went out and bought one of those. They are the best, especially with Chicago winters. So
Yes.
just as you know, everything can be purchased pretty much on Amazon in all different sizes, but they are easy to put on your outer boots or shoes, whatever you want. But boy, they certainly could help.
What are they called?
So I looked it up while we had the presentation. I'm just going to share the screen. They have different names. So the one that I found is the ice cleats. I also have seen them at Bed Bath & Beyond as well. Can you see that?
Yep, that's great, Gail.
Yes. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay.
Yeah, so you can see the like it loops around your foot. Someone mentioned they have it at Costco, and then here it just adds that extra layer of traction that we want.
It's great. I mean, people look at it, it looks like it's for mountain climbing, but it's obviously not. It's just an absolute extra layer of protection because of, black ice or anything like that. But I found them very useful. I use it when I'm walking our dogs. But there were so many great tips here this morning that I picked up. And the most important message, I think, is really having fun with it. I've heard of so many other things people have told us that they've done during the pandemic in terms of with their friends, and they've done some indoor walking in the malls and definitely have had a coffee date after that. It was a lot of things that you can do.
Yeah, and really the message is we need to not just hole up in the winter and hibernate. There's options for going and doing things online. There's options for getting to a mall and walking around. And we should also try to get outside and just do so safely.
Oh, no question about it. And Margaret has also put the CJE website on there. Please do look up a lot of their programs on exercises. That they have wonderful programs, and during the pandemic also had a lot of virtual programs. So if you don't want to get out and you do want to see something virtual, you can have that option as well. So thank you so much. And anybody have any other thoughts, comments, questions? Enid, you can unmute yourself, Enid.
Yep, I put it in the chat, but I'm looking, how do you find a really good personal trainer if you're older?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of like companies out there, you'd have to Google them, that like specialize in people 65 plus. It really is comes down to Google searching, I think, for people that have experience, training, and knowledge in working with people that might have some specific health needs, if you've got a bad shoulder, bad back, etc. So Googling. I think you want to look for someone who has some training, and then ultimately it's also like a relationship and someone that you feel comfortable with and can trust and all of that. So I would just kind of like Google like personal training exercise, like for older adults, for seniors, to kind of start looking for those people and then kind of just researching it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was also I know this location may not be desirable, but I was at the North Shore Senior Center, and they do have a personal trainer who I do believe does go to individuals' homes and things like that. So because he's there for older adults at the North Shore Senior Center, I would certainly reach out to them as well.
Right.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you again, and we put the information on Stepping Out to Fitness. We hope you will join us for that throughout the year next year. So happy and safe holidays to all of you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.